Hello.
Hello.
To be fair, it has been absolutely mad here. It's all for crazy. The government's having a go at me today. It's hilarious. We got the buggers on the run. Really, they're totally wrapped.
We saw that, and it's all over the news. It's crazy.
Yeah, right.
I I really don't know what's going on because it's against freedom of speech, actually.
Oh yeah, well, that's why they're doing it. What's happened is in that interview, I hit so many buttons in explaining what this is really about that they've absolutely shat themselves
Yeah.
because the whole thing, if you can explain what's going on, yeah, but more than that, if you can start preempting what they're planning, completely destroys and dilutes their ability to sell that when they go to the next stage. So the numbers are how they're doing it. I've just watched a presentation by an American physician, a lady, who's just simply explained how they're manipulating the death certificates. It's just extraordinary.
It must have been about 20 years ago. You woke me up. I watched your lectures, I read your books, and it changed my life. It rocked me to the core. The whole worldview, everything changed. And it's totally crazy to see that all these things you talked about those years ago are now coming into full fruition. It's all happening right now in front of our eyes.
Yeah, exactly. But that means that as the Chinese say, we're at a point of danger and opportunity because this has cleared a lot of people out. I mean, of believing that the powers that they thought ran the world run the world.
Yeah.
And it's cleared people out of this immediate, like, reflex action dismissal. A few people can't run the world. What I've taken the world over in front of your eyes in a matter of 2 or 3 weeks. So, that's gone, except among the ones that are really, well, beyond help, really, because so um, they've so allowed themselves to become software um, minds that have no capacity for true thought. Well, actually, they do, but they've not chosen to take it. They'll believe anything they're told as long as the government says it. But there's been I mean, the interest in this video. I mean, it's going all around the world. It's been amazing. People passing it on.
Yeah.
Um, and they've made a big mistake, really, because by banning it when it was getting such big numbers, um, they've actually given me incredible credibility and what's in the video credibility.
Just they could have just said it's true. We did an interview with Shepard Umbelas last weekend, and he was talking about the virus is created to hide the fact that a comet will hit us, that Planet X is coming back, and a lot of things. He also said the virus is not real and all that. And the video is still up there. Nobody took it away. Nobody did anything. So there are tons of COVID videos on the net that talk about conspiracies and stuff, and they're all there. They're all accessible. Why did they take yours?
Well, they took mine for a number of reasons. Well, the key reason was panic, because of what's in it,
Mm.
and also because I'm well known after all these years, the ability to get it out. My last video that I did with that organization, London Real, about 2 weeks earlier, it passed 5 million views. It passed 1 million views in 24 hours before they started putting the shadow banning on it. And even then, it got to over 5. It's probably 6 now. So they could see those numbers. And the big thing in it that made them panic was the connection between 5G and current events. And what was really massive for them was pointing out that at 60 gigahertz, 5G stops the body absorbing oxygen, because that's one of the way they're taking some people out. That's why the New York doctor. Said he'd never seen lungs like it, and it certainly wasn't a virus. Video that was on my site recently.
German people are still in this. Oh, this is all over after the Easter holidays, and it's this virus, and I'm wearing my gloves, my mask, and I'm gonna be okay.
And not seeing the big picture.
Yeah, and everything will be like it was before after it's gone. And we said in our last show, nothing will ever be the same again after this, because this is the beginning of the big plan. This is the end game for those who are controlling our world right now.
Well, it is a massive step in the end game. And if people had been reading my books over the last 30 years, when this happened, they would have realized immediately what was happening, because this hoax pandemic has given this global cult that I've been exposing all these years every box that they want to tick, even down to fine detail. And it's, from my point of view, it's just a classic of its kind. Of course, their technique that's advanced their power and centralized their power decade after decade has been to create a problem or the illusion of one, get the public in fear or outrage at the problem, make sure someone else is blamed for the problem and not those who've actually covertly created it, and then to offer the solutions to the problems they've created or the illusion of problems they've created. So they created 9/11 very clearly.
Oh, yes.
And their solution was to pick up a series of countries which was clearly and provably, those countries were listed in advance of 9/11. And when 9/11 happened, they started picking off those countries justified by 9/11. Then you had the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, which is a no problem reaction solution. They weren't there. They knew they weren't there, but they needed an excuse to invade Iraq, which was on their list. And so they made one up. And it's unbelievable, really, that when you think that the same people, not the same agencies, the same people that lied about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq to create a invasion with its catastrophic ongoing consequences were exactly the same people that gave us the official story of 9/11. But see, problem reaction solution, as I call it, this technique, would fail every time if we had a mainstream media in which there was any sign of journalism. Because the manipulators would create their fake problem or manipulate a problem and blame someone else. And at that point, between them and the public, the reaction, journalists would investigate the official stories of 9/11, human-caused climate change and all that stuff, another hoax. And they would find, as I have and many other people have, that it's a pack of lies. And they would then communicate those findings to the public, at which point you would not get the reaction that leads to the solution, because people would be aware that what's being claimed is not true. But we don't have journalists. We have, for instance, in Britain, we have the BBC. The BBC is not a news organization. It's a government department. And the journalists at the BBC, who are not, but claim to be, they're little more, really, than government administrators. Whenever there's an official story, the BBC will promote it, and they will deny access to their airways to anyone who is challenging it. So there can't be journalists at the BBC. It's an impossibility. And there can't be journalists at the in the German newspapers and in the German media. It's impossible. And this is why. What is a real journalist? It's someone who looks at a situation, looks at government claims, and then investigates all aspects of it with an open mind and finds it wanting. And when they find it wanting, they communicate it. Now, that's not allowed. The very act of being a journalist is not allowed in this mainstream arena and organizations like the BBC, etc., and the ones you have in Germany, because you have to work within online parameters whereby you can only ask questions within that limitation, and you can only communicate information within that limitation. So the very fact that these people work for these mainstream organizations means they cannot be journalists in the true definition of journalism. And because we don't have true journalism, then problem reactions can work all the time, because the claim of the problem and who's caused it and what must be done because of it is never challenged. That's done in the alternative media, which is why they're trying to shut it down.
Yeah.
So we have a situation with me at the moment, is that I put a video out. Well, I didn't put a video out. I did an interview, which was then put out, about the hoax of COVID-19, in which I talked about the whole way that it was all orchestrated and to what end. And I included the fact that to understand it, you also had to realize that technological generated electromagnetic fields, especially those of the power of 5G, have a tremendous impact on human health and the human energetic field, as well as human psychology. And what happened then is YouTube pulled it, then Vimeo pulled it, because, and then banned, in terms of YouTube, banned any mention or any video that was making this link. Now, at the very same time, the British government mainstream media broadcasting regulator, called Ofcom, Office of Communications, 100% government agency, told British mainstream broadcasters, radio and television, that they would face serious sanctions if they allowed any discussion whatsoever on their airwaves of any possible link between the rollout of 5G just before this virus hysteria started and the virus hysteria and current events. So you're looking at a constant pattern here of mainstream cult-owned, state-owned, same thing, organizations and censors who have a common goal, which is to stop any discussion of a link between the 5G rollout and current events. So that means, it tells you something, and that is that there is a connection, or they wouldn't try to silence it.
Can you tell us where the video is available, that people can see it?
Well, if you go to davidicke.com, you can see it.
Mm-hmm.
If you go to London Real, you can see it. But if you go to davidicke.com, you can see it, because there is a video platform called BitChute, which is a no censorship platform. There are no copyright restrictions, right, on that video interview. So anyone can download it, and I encourage them to do so. So it's in as many places as possible. So you could download it onto your website and have people see it there. The more points where people can see it, the better, because then there are too many points for them to keep banging their heads as the heads come up in the amusement arcade game, which is what they're trying to do. And because people have just passed on the link, and they passed on the link, and they passed on the link, We are now in excess of 5 million people have watched that video. And that's outside of YouTube. So, there's a good chance when by the time we finish with this, more people have watched it because it was banned than would have watched it on YouTube.
So we have this 5G now. What's the plan behind everything? What's the end plan of these people?
But the end game is something that I've been writing and talking about for the best part of 30 years. And this current situation gives them everything they want. The plan has been, there's much more to it than this. It's all in my books in detail. It goes back a long time. It's not just current this. This is where it's got. It's not just, but the idea is to, and what I'm going to say has been in my books for a long, long time. So I'm not being wise because this is happening. This has been in my books for a long, long time. They want to create what I call the Hunger Games society. And I called it that, obviously, after the Hunger Games movies, which portrayed a society in which there was a tiny elite with all the money and all the power. Well, the illusion of power, really. But anyway, and they oversaw, and they were, locked away in high-tech cities and stuff. And then the rest of the population was in poverty, deprivation, and dependency to that elite. And so if you look at a pyramid, you visualize a pyramid, you've got the few at the top of the point of the pyramid, and you've got the rest of the population at the bottom of the pyramid. And then between the two, you have a military police state to impose the will of the 1% on the population and to stop the 1% rebelling against the 1%. And I'll tell you an interesting thing. When I did my last series of talks, I put an image on the screen of that pyramid and those three sections. And I came across a picture of Adolf Hitler standing there talking to a vast multitude. And in front of him, immediately in front of him, was the military and tanks and people in uniform. And then beyond them, thousands and thousands of people. And what I asked my son to do, who's good at this photoshopping, Gaz, was to invert that Hitler picture and overlay it on that Hunger Games pyramid. And it was extraordinary because it was exactly the same structure. You had Hitler at the top, symbolic of this elite. You had the military police state in the middle, and then you had the multitude at the bottom when you reverse the picture. And that's what they want. But more than that, this is not a classic fascist state that they're building, nor a classic communist state. It's called a technocracy, which is defined as a society that's run by bureaucrats, technocrats, scientists, engineers. And they would oversee in this a global society run by artificial intelligence. And this is what all this smart technology is all about, and all this gathering AI. You've got these psychopaths from Silicon Valley, like Ray Kurzweil, the Google executive, talking about connecting AI to the human brain by 2030, so that AI becomes the human mind and replaces the human minds we have now. So that's the end game, with many, many other elements to it. And it would be run by a world government, not a world government of elected people, ultimately, but of bureaucrats and technocrats. And they would, via this AI grid, which would control everything. This is why all these appliances and cars and fridges, everything is being connected to the internet, the so-called Internet of Things. And the next stage of that is the Internet of Everything, which includes the human brain. And so this is where we come around to 5G. To run this system, this smart global grid system, they need at least the power of 5G to do it. They're already talking about 6G, but they need at least 5G to do it. And so they have a problem. Well, it's not a problem to them. Couldn't give a damn. But it's a problem for humanity, and that is that this 5G is incredibly destructive, both in terms of health and in terms of psychology. It affects the brain. I mean, we are electromagnetic, electrical entities. The brain processes information and communicates with the genetic structure via electricity. We have part of our being is an electromagnetic field, and any technologically generated electromagnetic fields that interfere with that human field, human electrical system, is going to cause mayhem. So if you look at the history of epidemics, pandemics, and flu-like symptoms, go back to so-called Spanish flu in 1918, and there was Asian flu and Hong Kong flu. People who've investigated this and specialized in this area have pointed out that just before those, quote, epidemics of flu-like symptoms, there were massive increases in the amount of technological radiation. For instance, Spanish flu in 1918, which was devastating, I mean, you know, well beyond anything that's happening now. It had nothing to do with Spain. It didn't start in Madrid. It started in military bases in the United States. And two things happened at that time. One, there was massive vaccination programs for the troops returning from the First World War. And they introduced intensive radar transmissions. And Spanish flu went around and it jumped between places where there was no connection. Remember, this is 1918. You didn't have the transport and the interaction then. And it was following this pattern. And the Spanish flu, the symptoms of Spanish flu included your blood would not coagulate. So people were bleeding to death, which sounds like flu, doesn't it? And then you had other increases in electromagnetic radiation, like satellites going up when these other pandemics followed. And here we had, through 2019, the rollout of 5G. And what happens? Bingo, this kicks off. And these sort of things will give people flu-like symptoms. But it's also important to emphasize that, and this is accepted by the industry, the telecommunications industry, there is a point within the 5G frequency band at 60 gigahertz when the oxygen molecules are affected by 5G at 60 gigahertz. And the outcome is that humans can't absorb oxygen in the amounts that they should. And I had a video on my website, still there, this week. And what it was an American doctor working in an intensive care unit in New York, in desperation, made this video, put it on the internet, in which he said, we were told to expect and treat an infectious disease called COVID-19. He said, that's not what we're looking at. We're not seeing that. He said, what we're seeing is something I've never seen before, in this way in an intensive care unit. He said, we're seeing people with lung problems that you would only really see if they were in a plane at 30,000 feet and there was a depressurization.
Like in high altitude sickness.
At altitude, they were losing oxygen. That's what you would expect to see in someone's lungs. That it was also like putting someone on the top of Everest without any acclimatization and obviously without any oxygen. You'd expect their lungs to look like that. So he was looking at lungs and he said, I've never seen anything like it. I don't understand it. That was caused by oxygen deprivation. And it just so happens that 5G can do that at 60 gigahertz. And that's one of the things that I talked about in my interview, which YouTube immediately banned. And that would have been a big red flag to them because they absolutely don't want people to be aware of that. Because I think that's one of the things that they're planning to do. I think they've already done it in some areas, but I mean, planning to do it on a wider scale. And so we are looking at the rollout of 5G, which absolutely must happen from their point of view for this global grid to function. And as they've rolled it out, this has kicked off. And another thing is that not only are they banning discussion of any connection or even debate of any connection between 5G and current events, they are, while people are locked away and can't protest, they're rolling out 5G at a rapid rate all over the world. We're contacted by people who can travel around. They're considered to have essential jobs. And they're saying, everywhere you look, there's more 5G towers going on. People around the world have said the same on social media. And, at a time when people have lost their employment and they've sat there while their businesses have been destroyed because they've not been allowed to operate because they weren't considered essential. It is considered essential to roll out more 5G all over the world at a rapid rate. Now, you put that together with the ban on discussing it and the connection, and you can start to see what's going on the 5G level. There are many other things that are going on as well. And another thing that's happening while this lockdown is going on is that another psychopath from Silicon Valley called Elon Musk is continuing to put satellites up at low altitudes to fire 5G at the Earth. And he has been given permission for about 20,000, and he wants 42,000. And he may be the lead man in this, but there are other companies doing the same, including one in Britain. And in this period of lockdown, Elon Musk has been given permission by the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, which is owned by this cult, which is why the telecommunications industry, owned by this cult, gets everything it likes, and 5G has been rolled out without any testing. The FCC have given Musk permission to install 1 million ground-based antenna in America, which will interact with his satellite system beaming 5G at the Earth. I call Musk a psychopath because there's no way in the world that he doesn't know what he's doing. The same with Bill Gates, another psychopath, who wants to vaccinate the world. He's been putting unbelievable amounts of money into it. He's now funding basically all the people that say they're working on a vaccine. He's the second biggest funder of the world government. He basically owns the World Health Organization, which is driving the policy of this so-called COVID-19 and the reaction to it.
And he stepped down from Microsoft. That's kind of interesting too. He stepped down from Microsoft to do this full time, to have more time for this stuff.
Exactly. Look, he stepped down from Microsoft just before this kicked off.
Yeah.
And now he's kind of the lead bloke saying we must vaccinate everybody. Because what he's saying, this psychopath, Bill Gates, is that nothing can go back to normal until basically everyone in the world is vaccinated against this non-existent, by the way, virus. And this is the scam. They want to get this vaccination into everybody because, one, it will contain other diseases. This is what they're doing all the time. So they can have other waves of pandemics ongoing to increase the fascist control. Also in this vaccine will be agents to sterilize people. This is one of the things I've been investigating and exposing for a very, very long time, is the agenda to sterilize the population. There's a reason for that, and it connects into this explosion of hysteria over transgender, actually. And what's been happening, it's even appeared in the mainstream media where they've gone, oh, what's happening? We don't know, can't be explained. That sperm counts are plummeting around the world, plummeting. And you will have maybe noticed in the last 24, 48 hours that Robert Kennedy Jr., the son of Robert Kennedy, the Attorney General to President Kennedy, who was assassinated in the 60s. Both of them were assassinated in the 60s. Robert Kennedy Jr., who's a big campaigner in America against vaccines and the dangers of vaccines, he actually posted something on the internet pointing out in the last 24 hours or so that Bill Gates's vaccination programs have been responsible in Africa, where they experiment on people all the time, where they've caused paralysis in people, and wait for it, where they've caused sterilization in people. So what they're doing—
He said it himself.
What they're doing is they use Africa as basically their laboratory, and when they find what works, they play it out in the rest of the world. Do you know, I'll just give you a quick one on sterilization. A small company in America, obviously cult connected, developed a sterilization gene which stopped both men and women, made both of them sterile if they consumed this. And what they did is engineered it, genetically engineered it into wheat and corn. So when you eat the wheat and corn, you're consuming this, and it sterilizes you. This little company then sold that knowledge and that development to Monsanto and DuPont. So there is this very clear agenda of sterilization of the population. And this is the fantastic opportunity of using this fake, non-existent virus to sterilize the entire world, not least because if you want to come out of lockdown, you've got to have the vaccination. That's the game. That's what they're planning. And what they'll do is they'll roll back some of the lockdown restrictions, maybe, late summer and around into August or so. But they won't roll back them all. No, just some. And what they'll then do in the run up through the autumn into the winter is they will have another wave of the so-called pandemic, just as they are about to release the vaccine. And they'll lock people down, because now this precedent of lockdown has been set. Next time there is a wave of, made up pandemic, there won't be a series, an incremental series of steps towards total lockdown. They'll just go straight into total lockdown. And they'll say, if you want to come out of that lockdown, you've got to have the vaccination. This is what they're planning. And Bill Gates is the front man. Bill Gates and Elon Musk should be in jail for the rest of their human life. Absolutely.
Exactly what you told us now. We can go a little bit from the lockdowns, a little bit. That's what the German newspapers wrote like 2 hours ago. That's the plan. So we're going to start to slowly get back to normal. And the second wave, I see that coming too, and that will be the start of the real crazy stuff going on, I guess.
Yeah, but you know something, given what I've just said, by the time we get into that part of this year, 5G will be far more rolled out around the world.
It sounds like it will be everywhere.
60 gigahertz, you cannot absorb oxygen. If they want to turn a pandemic, which they blame on this non-existent COVID-19, COVID-1984, we should be calling it, they just need to switch the frequency of 5G to 60 gigahertz, and bingo, they get what they want. So, I mean, one of the big problems, you see, and I do understand it, I completely understand it, is that people go about their lives, through their lives, and they never actually meet many fully fledged, sometimes most people, any fully fledged, undiluted psychopaths of pure evil. And I define evil as the absence of love. That's what's left when you take love out. And so it's hard for people to grasp the scale of evil that is actually running this cult, this death cult, which loves death, is obsessed with death. And people in much larger numbers as a result of this are now starting to grasp just some of the level of evil that's running their world.
What are the people actually dying from at the moment? Is this just a normal flu? And what about the places where 5G isn't present? Is this just pushing numbers, or what is it?
Well, 5G is a bonus, and it's a place where you can do more extreme things. But it's not necessary for 5G to be somewhere for this scam to play out. Oh no, because the whole foundation of it is numbers. What are people dying of? They're dying from what they've always died of in this period of the year. This is why the death figures have not been rising from deaths from all causes at a time when we're supposed to have had all these extra deaths from this non-existent COVID-19. I've just watched a video. I've been devouring information on this stuff, every waking second for weeks. And I've just been watching a video by an American physician who is explaining. In fact, I did explain this myself in the video that was banned, in the interview that was banned, how death certificates are being manipulated. This is what is happening. And this is what medical staff have been told to do, doctors, nurses, all of them. First of all, let me just take the sequence. And this has not come from me. This has come from doctors, virologists, specialists in their area. It started in China, so it seems, in Wuhan. Wuhan, that was the first 5G smart city that went online in China in the run-up to this all starting. You can see why they want to ban videos that make a connection between this and 5G. Anyway, people started getting sick, and it was affecting their lungs. So in this wet market in Wuhan, so the authorities, the medical authorities, took a very small number of them, and they took genetic material from the fluid in their lungs. And note, it wasn't a virus, it was genetic material. But they decided that the cause of this, with nothing to back it up, was a virus, which got the name COVID-19. And first of all, as in the West when it came here, and still now to a large extent, they were making diagnosis for COVID-19, which they just pulled out of nowhere, on the basis of symptoms. Now, what do they say about the symptoms of so-called COVID-19? They're flu-like. And there is a long list of things that create flu-like symptoms, including electromagnetic fields. But anyone who had flu-like symptoms then in China was diagnosed COVID-19. And then they started testing people for this virus they decided was the cause, but never proved it. And this test, which is being used throughout the West now, is not testing for COVID-19. Well, it doesn't exist for a start, but they're not testing for it. They have to admit it when you press them, they're not. So many doctors who never get in the mainstream media have pointed out, we're not testing for COVID-19. We're testing for a genetic material that basically they took out of the lungs of those people in China. Now, this genetic material, a lot of it is in almost every person's body. So because the test is not for a virus, but for a genetic material which has a certain code, most people are going to test positive, not for the virus, for the genetic material. Mm-hmm. So there was a guy in 1890 called Robert Koch. He was a bacteriologist and he was a physician. And he developed criteria which have been the bastion for mainstream medicine ever since. The criteria for proving that an infectious disease, as you perceive it, is caused by what you say it's caused by. And they became known as the Koch postulates. And number one, everyone who has the disease involved must have the same symptoms. Those you say have got the disease must have the same symptoms. Two, you must isolate what you say is causing the disease from all other genetic material. So there's no contamination. You've only got what you say is causing it. In this case, a virus, COVID-19. That you must then be able to inject this isolated agent you say is causing the disease into a living host, and that living host then gets the disease. Yeah. You must then be able, number four, to take material from that host, inject it into another host, and they get the disease. Then you've proven that this agent you say is the cause of the disease is the cause of the disease. Like I say, this has been centrally used in mainstream medicine ever since. Not one of those four criteria were in any way met with COVID-19. None of that has been done. They have never isolated what they claim is this virus from that genetic material, much of which is in everyone's body, in the way that they should do, because it doesn't exist. So they can't find it. So they use the genetic material. Now, the test is called the RT-PCR test, and it was invented by a guy called Kerry Mullis, a biochemist in America in 1984. Now, he said, the inventor of the test that they're now using for COVID-19, that this test should not be used to diagnose an infectious disease.
Wow.
He said that. Now, what this test requires is what they call amplification. So you've got this genetic material, which is tiny, and they amplify it in this test. In other words, they basically bring it out, make it larger. But as they bring it out, and this is what doctors and such like that don't get in the mainstream are all saying, many in Germany, when you amplify it, it also amplifies not only what you say you're looking for, it also amplifies all the other genetic material as well. And so as you amplify it, you're bringing out more and more genetic material from the sample that will test positive in the PCR test. So if you say we'll amplify the material to say 35 times, 35 cycles, you will bring out enough of the other genetic material, which is found in so many people's bodies anyway, doesn't cause them any trouble, and you will get some positives and you'll get some negatives. But you amplify the material, say 60 times, and you've brought out so much genetic material that you're now hitting stuff that is almost in everybody's body. And at that point, almost everyone will test positive for COVID-19, but they're not. They're testing positive for the genetic material in its various forms that almost everyone will have in their body once it's been amplified to a certain level. And there's a doctor in America called Andrew Kaufman. He's a doctor of medicine, works in psychiatry now. And I saw a video of his, and my son Jamie has just done an interview with him last night, which is on my website, davidicke.com now. And he came up with a tremendous piece of research and observation. First of all, he points out, and this is kind of well known by people who've studied this whole viral area in any depth, that when a cell gets poisoned, it starts secreting material because it's trying to detox itself.
Yep.
And what it sends out is something called exosomes. And these exosomes have a number of functions, but one of them is as a messenger to the other cells. It's saying, hey, we got a problem here. You know, be careful, watch out, there's a problem here. So whenever a cell is poisoned, these exosomes are excreted as part of the immune system response. Now, the cells to do this can be poisoned by toxins. They can be poisoned by fear and stress. So people are going to be producing this stuff all over the world now. And they can be produced by lots of other things, but one of them is electromagnetic fields, like 5G. So he then looks, Andrew Kaufman, at a picture under a microscope, a slide of exosomes and what they look like, this natural immune system response from poison cells. And then he gets a slide under a microscope that they are claiming is COVID-19. And these two things are the same. He then looks at the genetic code and structure of exosomes, a natural immune response, and COVID-19, and they are the same. They even connect to the same or attach to the same receptors on the cells. They are the same. And what they've done is they have taken this natural immune response of exosomes to poison cells, and they've called it COVID-19. So anyone with poison cells of any kind is going to test positive for COVID-19. So what they're then doing, and they did it in China, see, how come the China figures were going through the stratosphere and then went, woo? Because if you are diagnosing to get certain figures, and you are testing to get certain figures, and you're manipulating the figures to get certain figures, well, to stop things going down, all you have to do is change the way you test, change the way you diagnose, and change the way you fix the figures. And the figures will just plummet. So China's now opening up again, while the West is in disarray. And this global cult doesn't have borders. And one of its big centers globally is China, along with Israel and the United States and Britain and so on, Germany and France. Anyway, so what they did as they moved into the West with this, oh, the pandemic's coming. The same process happened as in China. First of all, they started diagnosing on symptoms. So anyone with flu-like symptoms was now suddenly diagnosed COVID-19. And the documentation is now coming to light where it shows that that's what people were told to do. And they then had what they then started testing people. And for reasons I've described, lots of people test positive. But the big problem was this. They were trying to sell a lethal, dangerous virus pandemic, but they couldn't produce the bodies. They couldn't produce the dead bodies because it didn't exist, so it can't be lethal. So what they started doing was, as I said earlier, they started diagnosing people with other things to have COVID-19. And this is how it works. You go into hospital with lung problems. So by the way, there's a real common denominator between Wuhan and Lombardy and Milan, which is the center of the big health problem in Italy. And that's both Lombardy and Wuhan have extraordinarily, infamously toxic air, where they have loads and loads of lung problems. Lombardy, the last figures I saw, in 1 year in Lombardy, 100,000, just a few hundred short of 100,000 people died in Lombardy of all causes, a lot of it from lung disease. The next Italian region, death from all causes in the year, was 57,000, Lazio. So enormous numbers of people die in this Lombardy region because of the toxic bloody air. And also there was a massive rollout in Lombardy, around Milan particularly, of 5G just before all this happened. Anyway, oh, by the way, just a quick one. Japan did not have a lockdown and a state of emergency, even though it's so close to China. Obviously, COVID-19 arrived in Japan via snails. But a few days ago, the government of Japan announced a state of emergency because of COVID-19. 10 days, 2 weeks after Japan switched on 5G. So anyway, so now you've got people who are dying of other things, but now you are diagnosing them COVID-19. This is how it works. You go in a hospital and you've got a problem. It's worth pointing this out in relation to Italy, and this is from the Italian Health Service. 99% of people who have been designated to have died from COVID-19 have had 1, 2, 3 or more other life-threatening diseases and problems. That's 99% have had other diseases and problems. So they come into the hospital and they test them for COVID-19. And they test positive, a lot of them, for the reasons I've described. When they die of other things, they are said to have died of COVID-19. This is where the numbers are coming from. We have a guy in Britain who, some years ago now, quite a few years ago, was a famous comedian. And he died this week. And his name was Eddie Large. And this is just a classic example of how the scam's being played. He goes into hospital with heart failure. He's had a bad heart for a while. And he goes into hospital with heart failure, damaged heart. They then test him for COVID-19. He tests positive for reasons I've explained. He then dies of heart failure. And they say he died of COVID-19. Or actually, they don't. He goes on the numbers of people that died of COVID-19. But the classic phrase I'm seeing repeated all the time in the media and by the authorities is this: this number or so and so person died after testing positive for COVID-19.
Yes.
Not died of, died after testing positive. So you see the scam, but if they die after testing positive, they go on the death figures. So what they're now doing, because people like me have pointed this out, the death rates from all causes are not going up compared with previous years. Last year, for instance, even though we're supposed to have all these deaths from COVID-19. So obviously, it's not people dying from COVID-19. Other causes are being redesignated COVID-19. What they've now done is started to manipulate the figures outrageously to try to make it look as if there are more deaths. And eventually there will be, of course, because a lot of people that are under lockdown are going to die because they're under lockdown. And because hospitals have stopped operations, they've stopped consultations for cancer. More people are going to die, but not COVID-19, of the lockdown. So anyway, this is how they're doing it. And so as they've increased, I've got the figures here, as they've increased the COVID-19 deaths, the number of people compared with last year and other years who are dying of other causes are going down. Right? It's in the figures. The people are suddenly dying of other things. It's coming down. And the COVID figures are going up. And they're actually the same people. So this is how it's done. And this is how it's scammed. And any proper journalist could have worked this out. But they don't, because they're not journalists.
In Germany, they have said at least they have more beds for COVID-19
Yeah.
when the figures are going down. But it's crazy.
Well, people, what we call citizen journalists like yourself, have gone out with their camera phones, and they've been filming as best as they can around these war zone hospitals, and they're empty.
Yeah.
Well, of course they're empty. Because there's not a pandemic, so people aren't coming from that point of view, and also they've shut down other operations and other consultations, so that's not going on either. No wonder they're bloody empty. There was one guy in Britain last week who went into a hospital, walked around for 2 hours, it was empty, taking pictures with his phone, showing it was empty, put them on the internet, hey, where's the war zone, basically. And they've just jailed him for 3 months.
Yeah,
it's all a scam, so they have to keep it out. That's why my video was deleted by YouTube. So this is what's going on. But one of the things that they're doing in Britain, and you'll see this in other places, is despite the fact they can't produce the numbers except by manipulating the figures, they're still creating like temporary mortuaries and all these things that are going on. And they've created this place in London, which they're calling Nightingale, which is, I think it's a conference centre. And they've turned it into an emergency intensive care area with loads and loads of beds. So either that's just to frighten people, and they're going to look idiotic when they don't fill it, or and they don't fill the mortuaries, the temporary mortuaries, or they're planning something else. And 5G is rolling out all over Britain more and more and more. The more people are locked away, and there's a very good chance that what they'll do, and they might do this in other countries as well, is because the hospitals are empty because there's no pandemic, they'll focus everything on that Nightingale Centre and let the media have access to that. That is what's going on all over the country when it's absolutely not. And you see, for me, there's a number of people that should be in prison, not just the psychopaths like Gates and Musk and such like. But there's a lot of journalists. They won't be, of course, but there's a lot of journalists, a vast, vast number of mainstream journalists who should also be in jail for dereliction of duty and crimes against humanity via dereliction of duty, because any proper journalist could have worked this out. And so many other real journalists have worked it out. They just don't work in the mainstream.
David, let me ask you something about the cult, because you keep referring to it as this cult. I think it's the same as other conspiracy theories. I hate this word, but people understand it when you call it that. Called the Illuminati, this cult. I always believed, and of course, following your work and other people's work, I always believed there is a non-human part to this cult. Would you agree?
Well, there absolutely is. I've been writing about it for, decades. There is, and this cult is basically the representative of that non-human force within human society. But even the nature and structure of this cult is there to be seen with this virus hoax. Because I've mentioned China and then it came to the West, how could that all be orchestrated? Well, this cult goes back a very, very long time, goes back thousands of years at least. And it's been working towards this end game because the end game is technological. And thousands of years ago, the technology wasn't there. And the ability of people to build their own technological prison wasn't there. So humanity has been brought through like a herd of cattle to develop the intellectual ability to build their own technological prison, but without developing the wisdom to see that that's what they're doing.
Wow.
So this has been planned for a very long time, and humanity has been brought to this point. Symbolically, if you'd have given a computer to a Stone Age guy, I mean, what would he do with it? Wouldn't know what to do with it. But now humans have been developed intellectually to the point where they can build their own prison, because this is where it was always leading. Because this non-human force, which operates outside the frequency band of human sight, has known about this technology. It knew about this technology, worked with this technology when humans were knocking rocks together.
Yeah.
And humanity has been developed in the way I've described to be able to eventually use this technology to create its own enslavement. And this non-human force exchanges technological knowledge in these underground bases they call DUMBs, deep underground military bases all over the world, particularly in America and such like. And so when you look at these smart technologies, and notice this, these smart technologies, there's not a gap. It's seamless as it rolls on and gets more and more advanced so that they can do more and more things in terms of control. It's seamless. They're not sitting around a table waiting for some geek in a garage to invent the next level of the technology. It just rolls out. And it's because your people like Gates at Microsoft and your Musks and all these other major technological developers, Facebook as well, Google, which owns YouTube, what the cult does is it uses front people, and these front people become very, very rich and appear to be the vehicle or the origin of this stuff, when actually they're the vehicle. And so this technology is fed through. This is why you've got organizations like DARPA, the technological development arm of the Pentagon, and a CIA version of that called InQtel or IQT. And they seed fund these technology companies to develop technology that would serve this agenda and human surveillance and control. But it's not all coming from these companies, it's coming through these companies. So it's not an accident that, or a coincidence that Bill Gates was fronting up a cult operation to do with developing computerization and software. And he's the same Bill Gates that's now fronting up this vaccine scam and agenda. He's the front man for the cult. Very, very dark entity, very sinister man, Bill Gates. And so what you have is this developing of people so that they create their own technological prison. But how does this cult work? First of all, if you think of a spider's web, and in the center of the web is the spider, that's the non-human force that's driving the agenda ultimately. Then the strands in the web immediately around the spider, they're your most exclusive secret societies. And they'll know what the game is, utterly. And then as you come out from the spider, you hit that part of the web where the secret societies are that we know about. Knights Templar, Knights of Malta, Opus Dei, Freemasons, inner core of the Jesuit order, and so on. And then eventually you meet, as you come out from the spider and the web, you meet a place that I call the cusp. This is the place where the hidden meets the seen. And here you have what I call the cusp organizations. These are like the Bilderberg Group, the Council on Foreign Relations in America, the Trilateral Commission, the Club of Rome, which is a cult cusp organization created in 1968 specifically to exploit and manipulate environmental fears to justify the transformation of global society. And that's where the human caused climate change hoax came out of. And then you come through the cusp organizations, which are at that pivotal point where they're taking the agenda from the hidden and they're putting it out into the scene. So now you're hitting governments, government departments, banking systems, giant corporations, media at ownership level, mainstream media, and so on, Silicon Valley. And it seems that in the world of the scene, that all these organizations are working randomly and independently. But actually, all the major society-changing things that are directing the direction of human society are coming from the spider through the hidden, through the cusp, and into the main arena. And let's just make this point. What they're doing, because they have to control information, because information creates perception, and perception is what you need to control behavior. So the whole stadium in which this conspiracy is played out is controlling human perception, because that becomes human behavior. It's exactly what we see now. Human perception, oh, we're all going to die. Behavior, they'll sit there. Sorry, sir, can I go out? That's what happens. That's how perception becomes behavior. And perception comes from information received, which forms the perception. That's why they want to control information. But even the mainstream media, in terms of newspapers and television, and radio and stuff, to a very large extent, is planned to disappear. I mean, this is why they're losing advertising, losing viewers and stuff like that. Because what they want is all information moved onto the internet via Silicon Valley. And also Israel is massively involved in this. It's about the second Silicon Valley in the world. People don't realize it, but, you know, check the facts. And so if you get information onto the internet, you can then, and there's no other way or version, you can then control what people see and hear or don't by algorithms. You don't even have to have human involvement. So if you look now at where most people get their information from, and where they want basically people to get all their information from, and it's moving that way all the time, is Google owned YouTube, and Facebook. They're at the epicenter of it. Google is owned via its parent company, Alphabet, by Sergey Brin and Larry Page. Facebook is owned and run by Mark Zuckerberg and its chief operations officer, Sheryl Sandberg. YouTube, owned by Google, is run by a lady called Susan Wojcicki. And from those tiny few people, through those tiny few people, most people, even now, never mind where it's going, get their information. Every one of the people I've just named comes from 0.2% of the world population, because all of them are Jewish with allegiance to Israel. And when I say 0.2%, that's the Jewish population of the world, 0.2%. But I'm not talking about 0.2%, because Israel is controlled by a massive aspect of this cult called Sabbatean Frankism. I talk about it in my last book, The Trigger, because our Sabbatean Frankists were behind what happened in 9/11. And what people have done, and people in even the alternative media have done, is that they've said, it's the Jews. It's not. It's this secret society, Sabbatean Frankism, that hides behind the Jewish community. And this Sabbatean Frankist expression of the cult owns Google, owns Facebook, and owns YouTube. And if people want to see the real dynamic, they should look at Israel today. I've got some Jewish friends in Israel who feed me the information. The Israeli government, which is a Sabbatean Frankist cult government, has locked down Jewish people and Israelis almost more fiercely and with more draconian imposition than anywhere else, because the cult couldn't care less about Jewish people. It hides behind them, and it uses anti-Semitism to stop exposure of them, because they say, you're only exposing us because we're Jewish. No, I'm exposing you because of what you're doing. And so what we need to do is to put these fault lines down and these labels, whether it's Jewish or Muslim or Christian or none of them, Hindu, and all of them don't care, and realize that this cult has us all in its gun sights. And one of the key ways it operates is to have the different elements of human society with different labels and beliefs played off against each other. So they want Jewish Arab conflict. They want all these conflicts around the world. But look, because so much is coming into clarity as a result of what's going on now. When push comes to shove, and when a big cult operation is underway, the cult abuses Jewish people in Israel, perhaps even more than it abuses other people around the world in other countries. And it really is vital now that people who identify with different beliefs and different races and different labels realize that we are all different expressions of the same consciousness in the end. We're all expressions of each other. And that these fault lines of divide and rule are there to ultimately enslave all of us, whether you're a Jew or an Arab or a middle-class American. The way Israelis are being treated by the Israeli government in this lockdown is absolutely extraordinary. And the number of deaths they've had is tiny by comparison. But they've still used the excuse to treat Israelis in that draconian manner, because the cult serves the cult and everything else is detail. And what these buggers have done is they've walked into the room for the first time. They've walked out of the shadows. They've come from behind the curtains and they've walked into the room. And they've just heard the door click behind them. And it ain't opening again. So they think that this is a great step forward. In one way it is. But it's also the start of their end as well.
I remember when I actually started to talk to people here about you, and I was treated like a totally crazy lunatic. They looked at me like I'm from another planet, and I was treated really bad here because people do not want to see the truth. I don't know if it's a fear of being informed because it's easier to watch soccer on the television and never think about anything. And it doesn't hurt you as much because, yeah, of course it rocks you to the core, and of course it changes your perspective on things.
I have this analogy, right, of people like that, or people in general. You're in a desert, and you're on your knees, and you've got your head in the sand, and you've done that because you don't want to know that a hurricane's coming or a tornado's coming. So you put your head in the sand because you think it will go away then. But the tornado's still coming and your backside is still in the air. And very soon you will be spinning in the air yourself. If you take your head out of the sand and turn around and face the fact that a tornado is coming, then you can take avoiding action.
Yeah.
But if you stay with your head in the sand, one thing's for sure, at some point, your backside's going to be spinning in the air. And it's, I would say this to people because they get obviously frustrated and obviously they get often very unhappy because of the way that people abuse them for having a different opinion. When programmed insanity thinks you're normal, that's the time you know you're in trouble. When programmed insanity thinks you're insane, it's confirmation of your sanity. So when people have a go at me, I look at them and I think, well, thank you. Thank you very much. The Minister of Culture in the British government today has described me as a lunatic. I was overcome with gratitude. Someone so stupid as the culture minister in the British government thinks I'm insane. If he'd have thought I was intelligent, I'd have cried.
It's beautiful.
So you just got to laugh because the world is crazy. Yeah. You laugh, but you don't, laugh and ignore it. No, you laugh and you get on with it, but you laugh because it's insane. It's all insane.
Yeah, true words, man. I have one last question. I guess that's really important for us because we start to ask all our guests this question. Why did you decide to talk to us? Why did you trust us? Because you could just have said, those two guys I've never seen anything from. I will not waste my time talking to them. But you did, and you gave us an enormous, phenomenal interview today.
Well, I do everything on intuition. It comes from here. It don't come from here. It comes from here. This is our connection to out there. When you watch the body language, when people say, I'm thinking, they go here. I'm thinking. Well, where their hands go when they say, I know, I just know? It goes here. This is where it comes from. So I do everything through intuition, and if my intuition says, and you get to know after a while, you get the feeling very clear. You actually know what your intuition's telling you. The more you use it, the more sensitive it becomes. And so, do you want to do this interview? I don't say, well, let's work this out. Do I want to do this interview? Tell me more. I say, yeah, I'll do this. Sometimes I'll say, no, not to do that now. But I just go with this. Oh, yeah, I'll do that. Instant. That's what knowing is. Because knowing doesn't have to work it out because it knows. The brain has to work it out because it doesn't know. people ask me, and my intuition says, yeah, I'll do it. And I do it most of the time, as much as I can, especially now, because we are in a time of great danger in terms of this end game. But I said long time ago, this has got to get real bad before enough minds are focused that the world's not like they thought it was, for this actually to be turned around. And so now more and more minds are opening to another explanation of reality. And because I've written about this over decades, and I've got books galore to prove it, and it's now very clearly happening in front of people's eyes, that gives me enormous credibility as well, in the sense of, well, this guy can't be that crazy, because he said this was coming like 20 years ago, 25 years ago. So I do as much as I can, and I will go on doing so, because, I've lived alone now since about 2006, something like that, 7. My life is this work. I get up in the morning and I start, and I'm still doing it when I go to bed, and I do that 7 days a week, because people say you should have more things in your life, but I don't. I look at my life in a different way. You can look at your life as birth to death, and you can say, I need all this variety in my life, to have a balanced life, and there is some truth in that. But I see my birth to death life as going to work. I'll have my fun when I get out of here. I've come to I've come to work. That's what my life is. I've come to work. I've come to do something. I'm going to bloody do it. And I ain't leaving here till I've done it. And that's to bring this cult down, so humanity can actually live its life in freedom instead of living its life in tyranny. Under the radar tyranny up to this point, but now in your face tyranny.
Thank you that you confirmed that is right what we are doing here. So thank you very much for the time.
Thank you so much.
Been a pleasure, guys. Talk to you again sometime. I don't envy you guys living in Germany. I mean, crikey, even before this lockdown, it was a censorship fascist operation, wasn't it? I mean, for years I've not been able to speak in Germany, and it's supposed to be a free country. It's unbelievable. So I have great sympathy for you guys.
Absolutely. Thank you, David.
Stay safe, man, and it was a pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Bye.